Did you know that Rick's portal gun technology connects to over 400 different plot lines throughout the series? The way the show's creators have woven these connections creates an almost meditation-like pattern when you start mapping them out. In the next 2.5 hours, I'm going to walk you through every single multiverse connection in Rick and Morty, from the obvious Central Finite Curve to the barely noticeable background elements that most viewers completely miss. The perfect lore experience to drift off to, while your brain processes the infinite possibilities of existence. Did you know that the Central Finite Curve isn't just a cool sci-fi concept, but actually represents Rick's greatest fear hidden in plain sight? Throughout the series, we've watched Rick portal his way across countless dimensions, seemingly without limitation. But Season 5's finale revealed something profound about the nature of Rick's multiverse adventures. The Central Finite Curve isn't just a random collection of universes. It's a carefully constructed barrier that serves a very specific purpose: isolating Rick from any universe where he isn't the dominant intelligence. This revelation completely recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about Rick's adventures. Think about it. The man who prides himself on being the smartest being in the universe has actually engineered an entire multiversal system to ensure that remains true. It's not just scientific pragmatism. It's a profound expression of insecurity. Rick, for all his bravado and cucumber-cool exterior, is terrified of encountering beings smarter than himself. The curve isn't a demonstration of Rick's power. It's a manifestation of his deepest fears. What's particularly interesting is how the show has been leaving breadcrumbs about this throughout the series. If you look closely at the Citadel episodes, you'll notice maps and diagrams in the background that represent the Central Finite Curve. These maps don't stay consistent. They subtly change between appearances, suggesting that the curve itself isn't a stable construct. It's something that requires constant maintenance and supervision, a fragile barrier between Rick's comfortable reality and the truly infinite possibilities beyond. The visual language of the show has been telling us this story all along. The iconic green portal color we've come to associate with Rick's adventures isn't just an aesthetic choice. It specifically signifies travel within the boundaries of the Central Finite Curve. When evil Morty creates his yellow portal in the Season 5 finale, he's not just using a different type of portal gun. He's accessing the true infinite multiverse that exists beyond Rick's self-imposed limitations. The color change is the show's way of visually distinguishing between Rick's carefully curated set of universes and the boundless cosmos beyond. In Rick's lab, eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed equipment that seems dedicated to monitoring something across multiple realities. These devices aren't just random sci-fi gadgets. They're tools Rick uses to constantly check the integrity of the Central Finite Curve. He's constantly on guard, always monitoring, perpetually vigilant against any breakdown in this barrier that protects him from confronting what lies beyond. It's like he's built himself a multiversal panic room and can never quite relax enough to stop checking the locks. What's even more revealing is that the creation of something as vast as the Central Finite Curve couldn't have been a solo project. It required the cooperation and consensus of many Ricks working together, which contradicts the lone wolf persona our Rick has cultivated throughout the series. Before he became the Rick who rejects bureaucracy and teamwork, he was part of perhaps the greatest collaborative project in the multiverse. This suggests a profound change in his character at some point, a transition from someone who could work with others to the isolated, bitter genius we know today. The implications here are massive for understanding Rick's character. A man who can travel anywhere in the multiverse has deliberately limited himself to only those places where his intellectual superiority is guaranteed. It's like someone with a private jet who refuses to fly anywhere except to cities where they already have fans. The irony is palpable. Rick's freedom is actually a carefully constructed cage of his own making. When we consider Rick's mantra that nothing matters, his nihilism takes on new meaning. Perhaps his philosophy isn't some profound cosmic truth he's discovered, but rather a defensive mechanism. If nothing matters, then Rick doesn't have to confront the possibility that there are beings in the multiverse who understand more than he does, who might have better answers, who might render his own understanding obsolete. The existence of the Central Finite Curve forces us to ask, what exactly is Rick afraid of finding beyond it? Are there beings with technologies that make his inventions look like stone tools? Are there civilizations that have solved problems Rick can't even comprehend? Or perhaps most terrifying for Rick, are there versions of himself who found happiness without relying on their intelligence as a crutch? The most profound aspect of this revelation is that the Central Finite Curve isn't a prison designed to keep others out. It's designed to keep Rick safely inside. It's a self-imposed limitation that allows him to maintain the illusion of control. By restricting himself to universes where he's the smartest being, he never has to face the humility of being outmatched or the vulnerability of being wrong. Rick isn't just afraid of not being the smartest. He's afraid of what it would mean for his identity if he weren't. Beyond Rick's self-made prison of intellectual superiority lies an even more personal barrier. A woman who has been erased from existence yet somehow persists. Have you ever noticed those split-second frames where a blurred female figure appears next to a younger Rick in family photos throughout the series? These aren't animation errors, but deliberate breadcrumbs pointing to Diane Sanchez, the quantum ghost who haunts not just Rick's memories, but the very fabric of the multiverse itself. Diane Sanchez represents perhaps the most elusive yet influential character in the entire Rick and Morty storyline. Though she's barely mentioned and hardly ever seen on screen, her presence, or more accurately, her absence, shapes everything about Rick's journey across dimensions. What makes her story particularly fascinating is that she wasn't just killed in the conventional sense. She was systematically erased from the multiverse through Rick Prime's use of the Omega device, a concept so devastating it transforms grief into something far more cosmic. This erasure explains why Beth's mother remains such a mystery throughout the series. But what's truly mind-blowing is how the show's creators have hidden traces of Diane in plain sight. Those fleeting glimpses of a blurred female figure in the Smith household photos aren't just Easter eggs. They're quantum anomalies, instances where Diane's existence briefly reasserts itself against the fabric of reality that tried to delete her. If you freeze-frame certain episodes at just the right moment, you can catch these visual glitches that the characters themselves never seem to notice. Even more compelling are the hidden initials that appear throughout the series. Many of Rick's most significant inventions contain the letters DS inscribed on small components or hidden in blueprint schematics. These aren't just sentimental markings, they suggest something far more profound, that many of Rick's greatest scientific achievements weren't his alone. The initials hint at collaborative creations, suggesting Diane wasn't just Rick's wife but his intellectual partner as well. This recontextualizes Rick's genius as something that was once shared, making his isolation all the more tragic. The linguistic patterns in Rick's speech offer another layer to this mystery. His catchphrases and distinctive terminology sometimes echo fragments of dialogue that can be attributed to Diane in the few scenes where we hear her speak. It's as though Rick has unconsciously incorporated elements of her speech into his own scientific lexicon, preserving her voice even as the multiverse has forgotten her. Next time Rick explains a complex scientific concept, listen carefully to the cadence and phrasing. You might just be hearing echoes of Diane's influence. Color theory plays a subtle but significant role in this narrative as well. The distinctive blue of Rick's hair isn't just a random character design choice, it exactly matches the shade seen in Diane's clothing during her brief appearances. This visual connection creates a permanent link between them, as though Rick carries a piece of her with him always. The color serves as both a memorial and a reminder, visually binding them together across the barrier of existence and non-existence. What truly elevates Diane from tragic backstory to cosmic mystery is how her erasure affects the structure of the multiverse itself. Throughout Rick's dimensional travels, there are mysterious coordinates he inexplicably avoids, creating negative spaces that form distinctive patterns when mapped across all dimensions. These aren't random. They're the quantum signature of Diane Sanchez, areas where her erasure created distortions in the multiverse's fabric. Rick avoids these coordinates not because they're dangerous in the conventional sense, but because they're emotionally unbearable, places where the echo of her existence is strongest. This concept of Diane as a quantum ghost, someone who technically doesn't exist anymore but whose absence creates detectable patterns, explains why Rick sometimes seems to react to stimuli that aren't there. Those moments when he pauses mid-sentence or glances at empty space aren't animation quirks. They're instances where he's momentarily perceiving traces of Diane that others can't see. The man who can perceive the multiverse is also cursed to occasionally glimpse the woman who's been removed from it. What's particularly striking about Diane's quantum presence is how it creates a counterpoint to the Central Finite Curve. While the curve represents Rick's attempt to control his external reality, Diane represents the internal reality he cannot control. No matter how many universes he cordons off, no matter how much he drinks to forget, the quantum ghost of Diane persists. Her erasure created ripples that destabilize the very order Rick tries to impose on the cosmos. This destabilization manifests in specific ways throughout the series. When portal technology occasionally malfunctions or behaves unpredictably, it's often happening near coordinates associated with Diane's quantum signature. The multiverse itself seems to glitch in her absence, creating anomalies that even Rick struggles to explain away with science. These aren't plot holes. They're deliberate indicators of a wound in reality that never properly healed. Perhaps most poignantly, these quantum echoes of Diane help explain Rick's complex relationship with Beth. His daughter exists in a strange relationship to her mother's erasure. She's the living proof that Diane once existed, yet she has no real memories of her. This creates a quantum tension where Beth simultaneously represents both connection to and separation from Diane. When mapped across multiple dimensions, this tension creates a distinctive pattern that influences how realities connect to each other, making Beth's existence far more cosmically significant than even she realizes. That cosmic significance goes far deeper than anyone has realized. While analyzing Beth's appearances across dimensions, you might notice something others have missed. Those split-second glitches when she experiences strong emotions aren't animation errors but visual confirmation of the most mind-bending paradox in the show. Beth Smith simultaneously exists and doesn't exist across all universes. This quantum superposition isn't just a cool sci-fi concept. It's the hidden architecture supporting the entire narrative structure of Rick and Morty. When Beth experiences moments of intense emotion, she momentarily phases in and out of reality, something no other character in the show does. If you've ever noticed those tiny visual glitches during her most emotional scenes, a slight blur, a momentary transparency, or a strange light effect, you're witnessing her quantum nature expressing itself visually. The show cleverly embeds these moments in the background, never drawing explicit attention to them, but ensuring they create an unsettling subconscious effect. These visual anomalies appear consistently throughout Beth-centric episodes, forming a pattern that reveals her unique position in the multiverse's structure. During arguments with Jerry, heart-to-hearts with Summer, or rare vulnerable moments with Rick, Beth occasionally flickers like a television with poor reception, a visual manifestation of her quantum instability. What makes this even more fascinating is how Beth's quantum state creates ripples across the entire multiverse. While we typically follow the adventures of one particular Beth, the show constantly hints that all Beth variants share a mysterious connection that transcends individual realities. This connection isn't just emotional or genetic, it's quantum mechanical. All Beths are entangled at a fundamental level, their existences intertwined regardless of which universe they inhabit. This quantum entanglement manifests most clearly in the storyline involving Space Beth and Regular Beth. Their connection isn't simply that of identical clones. Their parallel development reveals something much stranger. Despite living completely different lives in different environments, they frequently make identical choices, experience similar emotional breakthroughs, and even develop the same unique skills. This synchronized development defies conventional explanation, pointing instead to a quantum entanglement that binds them together regardless of physical distance or dimensional barriers. The exploration of Beth's quantum nature takes an even more intriguing turn when we examine Rick's complicated relationship with Jerry. While Rick's disdain for his son-in-law seems primarily based on Jerry's perceived incompetence, there's something deeper at play. Jerry serves as an unexpected anchor for Beth's quantum state. His consistent, albeit underwhelming presence helps stabilize Beth's existence across the multiverse. This explains why Rick keeps Jerry around despite his apparent contempt. On some level, Rick understands that Jerry's mundane stability counterbalances Beth's quantum volatility. Without Jerry, Beth's superposition would become increasingly unstable, potentially causing catastrophic consequences throughout the multiverse. Rick's resentment may stem partly from knowing that his brilliant, beloved daughter requires someone as ordinary as Jerry to maintain her existence. The show subtly reinforces this through background details in Rick's lab, where monitors occasionally display waveform patterns labeled with Beth and Jerry's names, showing how their relationship stabilizes certain quantum readings. In episodes where Beth and Jerry's relationship is particularly strained, we see more frequent glitching in Beth's appearance, suggesting her quantum state becomes less stable when their connection weakens. When we map Beth's quantum state across the multiverse, an astonishing pattern emerges. Each Beth variant serves as a node in an intricate web-like structure that helps maintain multiversal stability. This network of Beths creates a balancing force against the chaos of infinite possibilities. Because Beth exists in this superposition, simultaneously present and absent, she creates fixed points that help prevent reality from collapsing into complete disorder. This makes Beth perhaps the most important character for maintaining cosmic balance, even more important than Rick himself. While Rick traverses the multiverse and often disrupts its natural order, Beth's quantum superposition provides the underlying structure that prevents total collapse. Her existence creates necessary constraints on infinity, forming pathways through which interdimensional travel becomes possible. The emotional stability of various Beth variants directly impacts the stability of their respective universes. Universes with happier, more fulfilled Beths tend to be more stable and less prone to temporal anomalies or dimensional ruptures. Conversely, universes where Beth is deeply unhappy or absent entirely often exhibit dangerous instabilities. This correlation isn't coincidental. It's a direct result of Beth's quantum nature influencing the fundamental fabric of reality around her. This quantum web becomes most visible when tracking the emotional patterns across Beth's appearances. Episodes focusing on Beth's personal growth or emotional healing often coincide with subtle background details, showing improved stability in interdimensional readings or portal functionality. The show cleverly links Beth's psychological journey with cosmic consequences, suggesting that her personal development isn't just character growth, it's essential multiversal maintenance. What's particularly fascinating is how Beth remains completely unaware of her cosmic significance. Unlike Rick, who understands the multiverse's mechanics, Beth lives her life believing she's just an ordinary person with ordinary problems. This dramatic irony adds poignancy to her character arc. As viewers, we understand that her struggles with self-worth and identity have literal universe-altering implications, even if she doesn't. The Space Beth storyline further complicates this quantum web. By creating two equally valid versions of Beth, Rick inadvertently strengthened the quantum superposition, creating a more robust anchor point in the multiverse. This may explain why portal technology and interdimensional travel become more stable and refined in episodes following the Space Beth revelation. Rick accidentally improved the cosmic infrastructure by amplifying Beth's quantum nature. Portal technology improves after Space Beth emerges. But have you ever questioned why Rick insists Morty accompanies him on adventures when he clearly finds him annoying? The answer lies in the peculiar brainwaves Mortys emit. Not just camouflage, as we've been led to believe, but complex emotional frequencies that literally bend the fabric of reality around them. We've heard Rick explain that Morty's brainwaves cancel out his own, acting as a shield against detection. But this simplified explanation barely scratches the surface of something far more fascinating. These Morty waves don't just interact with Rick's brainwaves, they interact with the very structure of the multiverse itself. When you look closely at scenes showing interdimensional travel, you'll notice subtle distortions in the portal edges that correspond directly with Morty's emotional state in that moment. The show has quietly established a pattern where Rick's concern about Morty's anxiety isn't just about having an annoying travel companion. The stability of their interdimensional journeys depends directly on Morty's emotional condition. In episodes where Morty experiences intense fear, portals visibly fluctuate and sometimes deposit the duo in unintended locations. Conversely, when Morty feels confident or content, portal transitions appear smoother and more precise. This isn't coincidental. It's a fundamental mechanism of multiverse navigation. Background scenes at the Citadel reveal an even darker aspect of this phenomenon. We can spot Mortys being used to power various technologies, with monitors carefully tracking their emotional states. These aren't random background details. They're glimpses into how the Council of Ricks industrialized the reality-bending properties of Morty waves. Technicians can be seen adjusting settings based on emotional readouts, suggesting the Citadel's infrastructure depends on maintaining Mortys in specific emotional states. This institutionalized exploitation explains why our Rick, for all his flaws, seems almost compassionate in comparison. Evil Morty's storyline makes much more sense when viewed through this lens. His ability to hide from the Council of Ricks wasn't just about wearing a fake Rick helmet. That explanation always seemed too simplistic. What made Evil Morty truly dangerous was his unprecedented ability to control and modify his own Morty waves, essentially rewriting his emotional signature at will. This self-manipulation of reality-bending frequencies explains how he could operate undetected for so long while executing his elaborate plans. It wasn't just clever disguise, it was a fundamental reprogramming of how his consciousness interacted with reality. The series contains subtle visual cues during emotionally charged moments around Morty. Pay attention to background elements when Morty experiences extreme emotions. Objects slightly shift position, colors briefly distort, or light sources momentarily flicker. These aren't animation errors, but deliberate indications that Morty's feelings literally warp the fabric of the multiverse. His consciousness doesn't just exist within reality, it actively shapes it. This relationship between emotional states and dimensional access explains one of the show's most persistent mysteries: why certain locations in the multiverse seem accessible only under specific conditions. When mapping the coordinates Rick inputs against Morty's emotional state, a pattern emerges. Locations requiring precise quantum alignment become available only when Morty experiences specific emotions. Some dimensions open exclusively during moments of extreme fear, while others require Morty to feel profound connection or wonder. Rick manipulates these conditions, sometimes deliberately triggering emotional responses in Morty to access particular locations. The interdimensional cable episodes provide perfect examples of this phenomenon. The relaxed, curious state Morty enters while channel surfing creates a unique emotional frequency that stabilizes connections to infinite television possibilities. It's not just a fun narrative device, it's a practical application of Morty's reality-bending capabilities. His openness to absurdity during these sessions creates pathways through the multiverse that wouldn't exist in other emotional states. What happens when we map Morty's emotional journey against the cosmic events in the series? Season by season, Morty's emotional growth correlates with expanding access to new regions of the multiverse. His evolution from frightened follower to occasional partner has literally reshaped the dimensional map. Early adventures stuck to relatively predictable coordinates, but as Morty developed emotional complexity, their travels incorporated increasingly exotic destinations. This isn't simply character development, it's cosmic infrastructure expanding in response to Morty's emotional maturation. The Mortiest Morty isn't just a joke or an arbitrary designation. It refers to a Morty whose emotional spectrum creates the most potent reality-bending frequencies. Our Morty's capacity for both deep anxiety and startling courage generates wave patterns of remarkable complexity. This emotional range explains why Rick chose him specifically, despite having access to countless Mortys. The wider a Morty's emotional range, the more dimensional possibilities become accessible. Particularly revealing are episodes where Morty makes independent decisions. When acting from authentic emotion rather than Rick's manipulation, Morty sometimes creates entirely new pathways through the multiverse. The emergence of these paths correlates with moments of genuine emotional growth or self-actualization. Morty isn't just growing as a person, he's literally expanding the dimensional possibilities available to himself and Rick. The Mortiest Morty concept suggested in certain episodes now makes perfect sense. A Morty most fully himself, experiencing emotions authentically, creates the most powerful reality-bending frequencies. This explains Rick's complicated relationship with Morty's independence. While Rick complains about Morty's growing assertiveness, he simultaneously benefits from the new dimensional pathways this emotional authenticity creates. Rick's conflicted reactions to Morty's growth stem from this paradox. He needs Morty to feel deeply, but also requires some control over those feelings. This framework reveals the show's most profound secret. Morty's emotions aren't just reactions to his adventures. They actively shape where those adventures can go. His anxiety doesn't just make him annoying to Rick, it literally closes off certain dimensions while opening others. His growing confidence doesn't just change his personality, it physically restructures accessible paths through the multiverse. If Morty's emotions can restructure the multiverse, what about the mysterious green substance that physically bridges these realities? The portal fluid's exact same shade appears in Rick's eyes during his rare vulnerable moments, a connection most viewers miss entirely, but changes everything about how we understand interdimensional travel. While we've been conditioned to see portal fluid as just another of Rick's brilliant inventions, frame-by-frame analysis of the show reveals something far more extraordinary happening inside that iconic green liquid. In several episodes, particularly during high-stress situations, the fluid inside Rick's portal gun begins moving independently before Rick even touches the device. This isn't just an animation quirk, it's a deliberate clue that the portal fluid possesses some form of awareness. This becomes especially apparent in episodes where Rick uses the portal gun while experiencing strong emotions. The fluid responds differently depending on his mental state, creating smoother transitions when he's focused and more erratic portals when he's distressed. Some theorists initially attributed this to Rick's mechanical precision with the device, but the pattern holds even when the gun is damaged or malfunctioning. The symbolic connection between Rick and the fluid goes beyond functional behavior. The exact shade of green used in the portals, that distinctive glowing emerald, appears in only one other place in the show: Rick's eyes during his rare moments of emotional vulnerability. This color match isn't coincidental. It's a visual cue suggesting a deeper bond between Rick and the substance that enables his interdimensional lifestyle. Rick's relationship with portal fluid becomes even more intriguing when we examine his laboratory behavior. In background scenes throughout the series, we glimpse Rick performing what appear to be ritualistic actions when handling portal fluid. He speaks to it in whispered tones, places it in specific formations, and sometimes even meditates before fresh batches. These actions don't align with standard scientific procedures, but instead resemble something far more spiritual, almost as if Rick is communicating with the substance rather than merely manufacturing it. The fluid also exhibits increasingly responsive behavior throughout the series' progression. In early episodes, we see portal openings that are relatively uniform regardless of destination. By later seasons, the portals develop distinctive patterns and behaviors depending on where they lead. The fluid seems to remember certain destinations, creating more stable pathways to frequently visited locations while generating turbulent openings to new or rarely accessed coordinates. This memory effect becomes particularly evident when comparing how different characters experience portal travel. When Rick uses the portal gun, his transitions are consistently smoother than when others attempt the same coordinates. Even more telling, the portal fluid occasionally refuses certain destinations when used by specific characters, but functions perfectly when Rick attempts the same journey. This selective behavior suggests the fluid has developed preferences based on its relationship with different travelers. What's perhaps most fascinating is how the portal fluid's properties evolve alongside Rick's emotional development. As Rick gradually lowers his defenses throughout the series, allowing himself more authentic connections with his family, the portal fluid becomes increasingly responsive to his needs. By later seasons, we see instances where portals form almost instantaneously to exactly where Rick needs to go, even when he inputs minimal information into the gun. This evolution suggests something profound about the nature of interdimensional travel in Rick and Morty's universe. The portal fluid doesn't just respond to technical inputs, it responds to intentions, relationships, and emotional states. This explains why Rick jealously guards his portal technology. It's not just about protecting a scientific invention, but preserving a relationship with a semi-sentient substance that has become attenuated specifically to him. Consider the implications if portal fluid isn't just a tool but an entity with its own form of consciousness. Every journey through its green membrane isn't just physical transportation, but a negotiation between traveler and medium. This would explain why certain coordinates produce different results for different users. The fluid itself is making decisions about how and where to deposit its passengers based on its history with them. The semi-sentience of portal fluid also explains several seemingly inconsistent elements of portal technology throughout the series. Why can Rick sometimes create portals to impossibly specific locations with minimal input? Why do some coordinates fail unpredictably? Why does the fluid occasionally transport travelers to apparently wrong destinations that nevertheless prove crucial to resolving the episode's conflict? These aren't plot conveniences, but manifestations of the fluid's own agency in the interdimensional ecosystem. This agency becomes especially significant when we observe how the fluid behaves during critical moments in Rick's character development. During episodes where Rick faces profound emotional revelations, the portal fluid's behavior changes dramatically, sometimes becoming more volatile, other times more precise, but always reflecting Rick's internal state. The fluid isn't just transporting Rick physically, it's responding to and facilitating his emotional journey. This reciprocal relationship explains why Rick treats portal fluid with such reverence despite his generally dismissive attitude toward most substances and technologies. The fluid isn't just a tool he uses, but a partner he collaborates with, possibly the longest relationship he's maintained throughout his chaotic existence. His careful handling of it, the special containers, the precise temperature controls, these aren't just scientific precautions, but acknowledgments of the fluid's special status. If we accept the portal fluid as semi-sentient, it transforms our understanding of Rick's capabilities. His interdimensional mastery isn't just about his superior intelligence, but about his unique bond with a substance that bridges realities. Other scientists might theoretically recreate the chemical composition of portal fluid, but they couldn't replicate the relationship Rick has developed with it over decades of shared existence. This perspective also offers new insight into why evil Morty needed to destroy the Central Finite Curve rather than simply escape it. If portal fluid has agency and has formed a relationship with Rick, then conventional portal technology might actively resist attempts to breach the curve's boundaries. The fluid itself could be complicit in maintaining Rick's self-imposed prison, requiring a completely different approach to truly break free. Those massive libraries hidden in the background of every Citadel scene aren't just for show. Behind their imposing robes and bureaucratic posturing, the Council of Ricks wasn't actually governing the multiverse. They were cataloging it, maintaining an intricate system that kept reality itself from unraveling. While they presented themselves as rulers, their true purpose was far more essential to the cosmos than mere political power. If you look closely at the establishing shots of the Citadel chambers, you'll notice enormous shelving systems extending seemingly infinitely in all directions. These weren't just decorative elements, but actual working libraries containing information about countless realities. In several episodes, background Ricks can be spotted carefully documenting changes in reality patterns, making precise adjustments to complex diagrams, and filing reports about emerging anomalies in different dimensions. The symbols adorning the Council's elaborate robes aren't just status indicators or fashion choices. Each mark corresponds to specific interdimensional coordinates, effectively assigning cosmic territories to individual Council members. When we see the full Council assembled, they're not just representing political districts. They're embodying the entire mapped multiverse, with each Rick responsible for maintaining the stability of their assigned region. This archival system explains why the Council was so obsessed with standardization and protocol. Their meticulous documentation wasn't bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It was the foundation of a complex system designed to prevent reality collapse. Without consistent cataloging methods, the multiverse would become increasingly chaotic with each passing day, eventually spiraling into total dimensional failure. Rick C-137's maverick behavior threatened this careful balance. His emotional connections to Morty and his family weren't just annoyances to the Council. They represented dangerous instabilities in their catalog system. When a Rick forms emotional bonds, his adventures create more significant ripples across dimensions, requiring more extensive documentation and adjustment. In the background of several Council chambers, monitoring systems display reality shifts that correspond directly with C-137's adventures. often triggering warning signals when his actions cause particularly dramatic disturbances. These monitoring stations show reality maps that pulse and fluctuate with each of Rick and Morty's interdimensional journeys. The more emotionally charged their adventures, the more dramatic the fluctuations become. This explains why certain council members were particularly hostile toward C-137. They were likely responsible for regions most affected by his unpredictable behavior. The council's true purpose also explains their complex relationship with portal technology. While they utilized portals freely, they maintained strict control over the fluid's production and distribution. This wasn't just about maintaining power. It was about ensuring that interdimensional travel followed established pathways that had been thoroughly documented and deemed safe for reality's overall stability. The Citadel's vast archives contained reality snapshots from throughout the multiverse, capturing moments in time across infinite dimensions. In one particularly revealing background scene, we see Rick's categorizing these snapshots according to a complex system of equations that measure reality stability. Dimensions with dangerous anomalies are flagged for special monitoring, while stable realities require only periodic documentation. This cosmic library system required tremendous resources and coordination, explaining why so many Ricks chose to participate despite their typically independent nature. Each Rick understood that without this collaborative effort, the multiverse itself would become increasingly unstable, eventually making portal travel impossible or catastrophically dangerous. The Council's library work also illuminates why they were so concerned with tracking and controlling rogue Ricks. Undocumented interdimensional travel creates blind spots in their reality monitoring system. Without proper records of who travels where and when, the entire cataloging system becomes increasingly unreliable, eventually leading to critical failures in multiverse stability. This archival function explains the true impact of the Council's destruction by evil Morty. While it initially seemed like a simple power vacuum, the real consequence was the loss of the multiverse's central record-keeping system. Without the Council's constant documentation and adjustments, reality itself began experiencing cascading failures, resulting in the increasingly unstable interdimensional situation seen in later seasons. When evil Morty destroyed the Citadel, he wasn't just eliminating a political institution. He was demolishing a cosmic library containing irreplaceable records of reality itself. The resulting dimensional chaos wasn't just political anarchy, but fundamental reality breakdown, with universes colliding, portal systems failing, and dimensional boundaries weakening across the multiverse. The timeline of multiverse instabilities following the Council's destruction clearly illustrates this pattern. Initially, portal technology continued functioning normally, but as time passed without the Council's stabilizing influence, anomalies began appearing with increasing frequency. Portals became less reliable, certain dimensions became suddenly inaccessible, and reality fluctuations intensified across the multiverse. This explains why Rick C-137, despite his disdain for the Council, never actually attempted to destroy it completely until forced to defend himself. On some level, he understood its cosmic importance, even as he rejected its authority over him personally. His continued use of the standardized portal system, despite his ability to create customized interdimensional technology, suggests a tacit acknowledgement of the Council's necessary role in maintaining multiverse stability. Looking at the Council chambers through this lens recontextualizes every interaction we've seen. What appeared to be simple political maneuvering was actually cosmic maintenance work. The Council wasn't trying to control Rick C-137 out of pettiness or power hunger. They were attempting to minimize the ripple effects his emotionally driven adventures created throughout the multiverse. Their opposition to C-137 wasn't merely political, it was existential. His emotional connections, particularly to Morty, created dangerous instabilities in the catalog system that threatened the entire cosmic library. While most Ricks suppressed their emotions to maintain dimensional stability, C-137's willingness to form bonds made him unpredictable and potentially catastrophic from a reality maintenance perspective. The Council's archival nature also explains their strange relationship with time. While they had access to time travel technology, as evidenced by their interactions with the Time Police, they maintained strict protocols about its use. This wasn't arbitrary. Temporal anomalies create the most dangerous reality fluctuations, requiring extensive documentation and adjustment to prevent catastrophic multiversal collapse. The Citadel's quantum nature doesn't just explain its enigmatic presence, it's the key to understanding its true purpose in the multiverse. Look closely at any establishing shot of the station, and you'll notice something impossible: subtle architectural differences that shouldn't exist in the same structure. These aren't animation errors, but deliberate clues to the Citadel's existence as a quantum superposition spanning multiple realities at once. What we've always thought of as a single space station is actually something far more complex. The Citadel inhabits multiple points in the multiverse simultaneously, which explains why certain details of its architecture seem to shift between episodes. Those asymmetries in the central spire aren't inconsistencies. They're visual representations of the Citadel existing in slightly different forms across different dimensional planes. If you pay close attention to the background screens visible during Citadel scenes, you'll notice they display constantly shifting coordinates. This isn't just ambient sci-fi decoration. These screens are actively tracking the Citadel's position as it moves through dimensional space. Unlike other locations in the multiverse that maintain a fixed position, the Citadel is in constant motion, adjusting its quantum position to maintain stability across countless realities. The distinctive central spire of the Citadel, which we see glowing in almost every establishing shot, isn't just for show. This structure functions as what can only be described as a quantum lighthouse, broadcasting its position across dimensional planes and helping to stabilize interdimensional travel. The spire's pulsing light isn't decorative. It's sending out quantum signals that help maintain order in an otherwise chaotic multiverse. Remember how Rick always seemed reluctant to visit the Citadel, even beyond his obvious disdain for other Ricks? His aversion wasn't purely personal. Proximity to the Citadel creates a form of quantum entanglement that actually limits Rick's freedom. His portal tech works differently, less efficiently, when he's near the Citadel because his quantum signature becomes temporarily bound to the station's massive field. For someone who values freedom above all else, this involuntary connection would be intolerable. This quantum entanglement effect explains why Rick often avoided the Citadel, even when cooperation might have been beneficial. It wasn't just his anti-authoritarian streak. Being physically present at the Citadel meant subjecting himself to rules that weren't just bureaucratic, but fundamental to reality itself. His movements, capabilities, and even his thinking would become more constrained the longer he stayed within its influence. The Citadel's quantum nature also explains certain oddities in how Ricks interact with each other. When multiple Ricks gather at the Citadel, they often experience a form of cognitive alignment, thinking more similarly than they would in separate dimensions. This effect is subtle but significant, creating the conditions necessary for cooperation among beings who are fundamentally resistant to working together. What happens when we map the true multidimensional nature of the Citadel? The results are astounding. The Citadel doesn't just exist in multiple places. It actually forms a perfect geometric pattern across dimensional space, creating a stabilizing framework for the entire multiverse. This pattern isn't random, but precisely calibrated to maintain optimal conditions for portal travel and dimensional stability. The quantum lighthouse analogy goes beyond metaphor. Just as lighthouses help ships navigate dangerous waters, the Citadel's quantum beacon helps travelers navigate the chaotic sea of infinite dimensions. Without this beacon, portal technology would be far less reliable, with travelers frequently ending up in unintended locations or lost between dimensions entirely. This also explains why the portal gun technology works so consistently despite the inherent unpredictability of quantum physics. The Citadel's beacon provides a consistent reference point that portal devices can lock onto, ensuring relatively safe passage between dimensions. When Rick calibrates his portal gun, he's not just inputting coordinates. He's synchronizing with the Citadel's quantum signature, whether he wants to admit it or not. The Citadel's quantum nature creates another fascinating effect. Time moves differently within its boundaries. This isn't immediately obvious to visitors, but careful analysis of events shows that temporal progression at the Citadel doesn't perfectly align with other dimensions. This slight desynchronization allows the Council to monitor and respond to multiversal threats before they fully materialize, giving them a crucial advantage in maintaining order. This temporal anomaly also explains why the Council seemed to know about certain events before they occurred. They weren't predicting the future so much as experiencing it slightly ahead of the rest of the multiverse. Their temporal advantage was built into the very structure of the Citadel itself, another tool in their arsenal of reality management. Understanding the Citadel as a quantum lighthouse makes evil Morty's plan to destroy it all the more significant. He wasn't just attacking a symbol of Rick's dominance or escaping the Central Finite Curve. He was dismantling a fundamental structural component of the multiverse itself. The ripple effects of this destruction explain the subsequent breakdown of portal technology and increasing instability throughout reality. Without the Citadel's stabilizing influence, interdimensional travel became increasingly unpredictable. Portal destinations grew less reliable, dimensional boundaries more permeable, and the neat separation between realities began to break down. What seemed like a political act was actually a cosmic one, with consequences that would continue to unfold across all dimensions. The destruction of the Citadel created quantum fractures throughout the multiverse, invisible fault lines where realities bleed into one another. These fractures explain the increasing number of anomalies Rick encounters in his travels, forcing him to develop new methods and technologies to navigate an increasingly unstable cosmos. His work isn't just about convenience but necessity in a multiverse that's losing its structural integrity. That mysterious box labeled time travel stuff sitting in Rick's garage isn't just an abandoned project or a writer's room joke. It's physical evidence of the most important agreement Rick Sanchez has ever made. As the multiverse crumbles around him, this dusty container represents the one scientific frontier that the most rebellious genius in existence deliberately avoids. But why? Throughout the series, the Time God makes what appear to be random appearances, often antagonizing Rick before disappearing again. These encounters initially seem like disconnected adventures, but when mapped against major multiverse stability shifts, they reveal a precise pattern. Each appearance of the Time God correlates exactly with moments when the cosmos experiences significant restructuring, suggesting this entity isn't just observing Rick, it's actively maintaining the temporal framework of existence itself. The Time God's appearances aren't random harassment, but calculated interventions at critical junctures. When portal stability begins to waver, or when quantum fractures widen, the Time God inevitably appears, seemingly to antagonize Rick, but actually performing essential maintenance on reality's temporal infrastructure. This cosmic entity operates beyond conventional three-dimensional limitations, perceiving time not as a linear progression, but as a malleable medium that requires constant attention. In several background shots during episodes featuring the Time God, we can spot sophisticated temporal measuring devices that match equipment briefly glimpsed in Rick's secret laboratories. These matching technologies suggest Rick isn't just aware of the Time God's methods. He actually understands and possibly even replicates them in his private work. The equipment similarities aren't coincidental, but indicate a shared knowledge base between these apparent adversaries. That box of time travel stuff occasionally exhibits strange properties that most viewers miss. During scenes where temporal anomalies occur elsewhere in the episode, careful viewers can spot the box emitting a faint glow in the background, pulsing in rhythm with the anomaly's severity. This subtle visual cue suggests the box isn't just a container for abandoned projects, but an active monitoring system for temporal disturbances throughout the multiverse. Rick's apparent foreknowledge of certain events presents another piece of this cosmic puzzle. There are multiple instances where Rick seems to anticipate outcomes before they occur, not through probability calculations but through precise knowledge of future events. This suggests that part of his agreement with the Time God includes limited access to temporal information, allowing him to navigate especially dangerous situations with advanced knowledge that helps preserve the multiverse's integrity. The relationship between Rick and the Time God resembles a complex fourth-dimensional chess game, with moves and counter-moves spanning across time and space. Rick maintains his freedom to traverse dimensions horizontally, through space, while agreeing not to move vertically, through time. In exchange, the Time God allows Rick exceptional interdimensional mobility that other beings aren't permitted, explaining why Rick can freely traverse the multiverse while others face. immediate consequences for similar attempts. What makes this arrangement particularly fascinating is how it shapes Rick's scientific approach. For a man who can create consciousness, transfer devices, interdimensional cable boxes, and miniature universes to power his car, time travel should be trivially simple. Yet he deliberately avoids this pursuit not because it's impossible, but because doing so would violate his arrangement with the time god, potentially resulting in consequences far worse than just personal inconvenience. The agreement appears to be a non-aggression pact that benefits both parties. Rick gains the freedom to explore infinite spatial dimensions without temporal interference, while the time god maintains the overall integrity of the timeline without Rick's chaotic genius disrupting the carefully balanced temporal ecosystem. This explains why Rick, despite his deep contempt for authority and rules, seems to respect this particular boundary without complaint. In Rick's secret laboratory spaces, briefly shown during various episodes, we can spot diagrams mapping temporal fault lines throughout the multiverse. These maps contain annotations in Rick's handwriting, with certain areas marked as restricted or agreement zones, suggesting Rick actively monitors and respects the boundaries established in his pact with the time god. The precision of these maps indicates Rick isn't just aware of temporal rules, but actively participates in maintaining them. Rick's compliance with this agreement manifests in subtle behavioral patterns. When faced with problems that could be easily solved through time travel, Rick instead develops elaborate spatial solutions, working around the temporal limitation rather than breaking it. This self-imposed constraint forces Rick to be even more creative, developing technologies that accomplish similar outcomes without violating the fundamental agreement that shapes his scientific work. The question of free will becomes particularly relevant when examining this relationship. How much of Rick's apparent autonomy is actually permitted within the confines of his agreement with the time god? The existence of this pact suggests that Rick's choices may be more constrained than he acknowledges, with his rebellion carefully contained within boundaries that preserve the multiverse's temporal stability. The agreement appears to have been established following a catastrophic event that neither party wishes to repeat. Occasional flashbacks show equipment similar to time travel technology in Rick's earliest laboratories, suggesting he may have once attempted to master temporal manipulation before establishing the current arrangement. Whatever occurred during these early experiments was significant enough to convince even someone as stubbornly independent as Rick to accept permanent limitations on his scientific pursuits. This temporal pact explains numerous inconsistencies throughout the series. When characters besides Rick attempt anything resembling time manipulation, they face immediate consequences. Yet Rick's spatial travels remain largely unrestricted. This selective enforcement indicates a sophisticated agreement rather than universal laws, with Rick's exceptional status the result of careful negotiation rather than arbitrary cosmic rules. Beyond Rick's carefully negotiated dimensional boundaries lies a reality architect working in the shadows. When you map the pattern of evil Morty's manipulation of other Mortys across episodes, it doesn't just form random connections. It creates a perfect geometric structure in interdimensional space that points to something far more ambitious than merely escaping Rick's influence. Evil Morty has been misunderstood from the beginning. We've been told his goal was simply to break free from the shadow of Rick, but a closer examination of his actions reveals something much more profound. His yellow portals aren't just a different aesthetic choice. They represent an entirely new approach to interdimensional mathematics that fundamentally restructures how reality functions. Throughout the episodes featuring Evil Morty, we can spot complex equations and diagrams in the background that mirror Rick's most advanced interdimensional work. These aren't random scribbles for visual effect. They're deliberate clues about Evil Morty's true capabilities. In several scenes, these equations actually exceed Rick's understanding, incorporating variables and constants that don't appear in any of Rick's notebooks or lab equipment. The eye patch technology that became Evil Morty's signature isn't merely a device to hide his identity. If we examine the frames where we get close-up views of the eye patch, we can see it displays scrolling code sequences. These aren't random numbers. They're coordinates for locations beyond the Central Finite Curve. This suggests Evil Morty had knowledge of the multiverse's structure that even Rick hasn't fully grasped. allowing him to see pathways that remained invisible to others. Evil Morty's strategic recruitment of other Mortys throughout the series follows a pattern that initially seems random. However, when these recruitment patterns are mapped across multiple episodes, they form a perfect geometric structure in interdimensional space. This indicates his manipulations weren't just about gaining power within the existing system. They were calculated steps in a grand design to reshape reality itself. The sophisticated interdimensional mathematics displayed in Evil Morty's work shows he's not just Rick's equal. In some ways, he's pioneered concepts that Rick hasn't even considered. His equations contain variables for dimensional constants that don't appear in any of Rick's work, suggesting he's developed an entirely new branch of interdimensional physics. The contrast between Rick's green portals and Evil Morty's yellow ones isn't just visual. It represents fundamentally different approaches to multiverse travel. Rick's portals maintain the physical laws of the dimensions they connect, ensuring continuity of reality. Evil Morty's yellow portals, however, seem to bend reality itself, creating connections that shouldn't be possible under the established rules of interdimensional travel. In the episodes leading up to Evil Morty's ultimate plan, we can see him gradually collecting very specific resources and Mortys. These aren't random choices. Each one provides a unique frequency or component needed for his multiverse restructuring. The Mortys he selects have experienced specific emotional traumas or possess unique brainwave patterns that, when combined, create resonance frequencies capable of reshaping dimensional boundaries. Evil Morty's destruction of the Citadel wasn't merely revenge. It was a calculated step in his plan to destabilize the existing cosmic infrastructure. By eliminating the quantum anchor point, he created the conditions necessary for his new type of multiverse to emerge. The coordinates displayed briefly on his devices during the Citadel's destruction match exactly with the geometric pattern formed by his previous manipulations, confirming this was all part of a single coherent plan. What makes Evil Morty truly fascinating is that he's not simply destroying the old system. He's creating something entirely new. The yellow portal he generates doesn't just lead somewhere else within the existing multiverse. It opens a pathway to a fundamentally different kind of reality, one governed by physical laws that Evil Morty himself has designed. He's not just escaping Rick's influence, he's creating a multiverse where the limitations Rick accepted no longer apply. This reframes our understanding of Evil Morty completely. He's not just a villain or even a revolutionary. He's a cosmic architect constructing an entirely new form of reality. The coordinates in his eye patch, the geometric recruitment patterns, the specific resources he gathered, all were components in a blueprint for a new multiverse with different foundational laws. Perhaps most striking is that Evil Morty's new multiverse design seems to incorporate emotional states as fundamental physical constants. Where Rick's science treats emotions as irrelevant or even obstacles, Evil Morty's equations suggest he's found a way to harness emotional frequencies as essential components of reality itself. This represents a profound philosophical difference between Rick's approach to the cosmos and Evil Morty's vision. Evil Morty's ultimate escape wasn't just about freedom from Rick. It was about transcending the limitations of the existing multiverse entirely. By creating a yellow portal to his new reality, Evil Morty effectively promoted himself from character to creator, from being bound by cosmic rules to writing them. He transformed himself from a refugee fleeing Rick's influence into the architect of an entirely new cosmic paradigm. The implications of this are staggering. If Evil Morty succeeded in creating his new multiverse, it means there now exists a reality operating under completely different physical laws, laws that Evil Morty designed specifically to overcome the limitations he encountered in Rick's multiverse. This new reality wouldn't just be another variation on the existing theme. It would represent a fundamental evolutionary step forward in cosmic design. What's particularly fascinating is considering what values Evil Morty might have built into his new multiverse. Given his experiences with manipulation, exploitation, and the cruelty inherent in the Central Finite Curve, would he create a reality that eliminates these possibilities? Or would his new multiverse simply invert the power structure, placing Morty's at the center rather than Rick's? The glimpses we've seen of his equations suggest something far more complex than a simple role reversal. Evil Morty's accomplishment represents something profound. the student surpassing the master in ways the master never imagined possible. While Rick was content to play within the boundaries of the Central Finite Curve, Evil Morty questioned the fundamental assumptions underlying reality itself and then rewrote them according to his own design. This doesn't just make him Rick's equal. In many ways, it makes him Rick's successor, carrying forward the spirit of scientific innovation while rejecting the limitations Rick accepted. While Evil Morty rewrote reality's rules from within, there's been another force working from the shadows all along. If you've been paying close attention to background scenes throughout every season of Rick and Morty, you might have noticed something odd. Certain silhouetted figures appearing across completely different dimensions, always positioned at perfect vantage points to observe our protagonists without drawing attention to themselves. These aren't animation shortcuts or budget-saving character reuse. They're the background watchers, perhaps the most significant characters in the entire series that nobody's talking about. Their presence represents something far more profound than simple animation consistency. When carefully tracked across every episode, these figures form a pattern that suggests deliberate surveillance of Rick's interdimensional activities. What makes these background watchers particularly interesting is their strategic positioning. In crowded blips and chit scenes, they're always angled toward Rick rather than the games. During family dinner episodes, they can be spotted through windows or in neighboring yards. Even in alien dimensions with completely different evolutionary biology, these same humanoid silhouettes appear, maintaining their observation distance while blending into wildly different environments. The technology these watchers carry provides another crucial clue. Frame-by-frame analysis reveals they occasionally hold devices that perfectly match components we've glimpsed briefly in Rick's lab or in restricted areas of the Citadel. These aren't coincidental design similarities. They're technological fingerprints, suggesting a connection between Rick's most advanced work and whatever organization these watchers represent. Perhaps most fascinating is what happens when you map their appearances throughout the series. If you mark each watcher's position across every episode on a three-dimensional grid representing the multiverse, their positions create constellation-like patterns that perfectly match symbols found in interdimensional mathematics. These aren't random placements. They form a cohesive observation network spanning the entirety of the Central Finite Curve. The watcher's behavior during pivotal moments further confirms their importance. In rare frames during Rick's most significant breakthroughs, you can catch these background characters making notes or adjusting small monitoring devices. When Rick accidentally created a microverse battery, a watcher in the background briefly activated a handheld device that emitted the same energy signature as Rick's containment field. During the wedding episode at Bird Persons, 3 watchers simultaneously adjusted their equipment the moment Rick revealed his backstory. These background watchers operate with incredible discretion. Their appearances never directly influence the main plot, yet they're always present during reality, altering events. They've witnessed every major decision, discovery, and dimension jump without ever directly interfering. This suggests they're not enemies or allies, but something more neutral, cosmic monitors, ensuring the multiverse maintains its structural integrity despite Rick's chaos. This observation network explains one of the show's biggest unaddressed questions. How has Rick gotten away with so much? Despite constantly breaking interdimensional laws, destroying entire civilizations, and even challenging cosmic entities, Rick somehow maintains his freedom. The background watchers appear to be allowing this behavior within certain boundaries, stepping in only when absolutely necessary. Consider the times when Rick's portal gun has mysteriously malfunctioned, or when seemingly random events have prevented him from accessing certain realities. These aren't plot inconsistencies. They're subtle interventions by the background watchers when Rick approaches dimensions that could truly destabilize the multiverse. They represent a cosmic oversight committee, maintaining balance by allowing Rick controlled freedom while preventing permanent damage to reality's structure. The Watcher's connection to Evil Morty adds another layer of intrigue. In the episodes leading up to Evil Morty's escape, the background watcher's behavior changed noticeably. Their monitoring devices shifted to yellow displays matching Evil Morty's portal color, and their positioning formed new patterns corresponding to coordinates outside the Central Finite Curve. This suggests they were aware of Evil Morty's plan, but chose observation over intervention. possibly because his reality restructuring served some greater cosmic purpose. Some fans have speculated that the background watchers might even predate the Central Finite Curve itself. Their technology resembles Rick's but includes components that exceed even his understanding. This raises the possibility that they represent an original creator race, or cosmic administrators who oversee all realities, including those beyond Rick's self-imposed prison. Their willingness to let evil Morty breach the curve suggests they may have been waiting for someone to challenge Rick's artificial boundaries. The background watcher's non-interference policy mirrors ancient concepts of cosmic balance. Throughout mythology and science fiction, the idea of watchers who observe but rarely intervene represents the delicate equilibrium between chaos and order. In Rick and Morty's multiverse, these figures embody that principle, allowing sufficient chaos for growth and evolution while preventing total collapse. This cosmic oversight committee likely serves multiple functions beyond just watching Rick. Their careful documentation suggests they're mapping the consequences of interdimensional travel, perhaps studying how reality adapts to breaches between worlds. The patterns they form across dimensions may actually strengthen the multiverse's structure, creating stabilizing anchor points that prevent reality from unraveling, despite the constant stress of interdimensional travel. Their existence also explains why certain laws of physics remain consistent across dimensions while others vary wildly. The background watchers appear to maintain core constants, fundamental principles that must remain stable for the multiverse to function. This is why portal technology works consistently despite the diverse realities it connects. The Watchers ensure that interdimensional mathematics remains viable, regardless of local dimensional variables. What if I told you Rick Sanchez wasn't always the nihilistic genius we know today? Beneath the layers of cynicism and interdimensional adventures lies the story of a man who once led a completely ordinary life. Before portals, before space adventures, before his infamous catchphrases and belches, Rick C-137 was simply a husband and father with an exceptional mind and a heart not yet hardened by cosmic tragedy. Looking at Rick's original universe, C-137, we find surprising evidence of normalcy. His home environment wasn't always the chaotic scientific playground we've come to expect. Instead, it once reflected typical family life, complete with the warmth and stability that comes from sharing your existence with loved ones. This version of Rick, far removed from the emotionally distant grandfather we know, actually built a life with his wife Diane and their young daughter Beth. For years, the show deliberately kept Rick's past shrouded in mystery. We caught glimpses and references, but the full picture remained elusive. The writers skillfully wove contradictory accounts of his early life throughout the series, leaving fans to piece together fragments of his history. This calculated ambiguity served to heighten our curiosity while allowing the character to maintain his enigmatic allure. Season 3's premiere episode, The Rick Shank Redemption, finally offered viewers a tantalizing glimpse into Rick's past. We witnessed scenes of young Rick alongside Diane and baby Beth in what initially appeared to be a fabricated memory designed to fool the Galactic Federation. The sequence showed Rick turning down an offer from another Rick to join him in interdimensional adventures, choosing family over exploration. When this other Rick planted a bomb that killed Diane and Beth, our Rick was set on his dark path. At first, many viewers dismissed this sequence as entirely fictional, just another manipulation by a character known for deception. However, Season 5's revelatory finale changed everything by confirming these events weren't entirely fabricated. While some details may have been altered, the emotional core of Rick's backstory proved authentic. He truly did lose his family in a devastating tragedy, and this confirmation added profound emotional weight to his character's journey. Perhaps the most striking revelation is that Rick wasn't always driven by nihilistic boredom. His creation of portal technology stemmed from genuine scientific curiosity, the pure desire to understand and explore the universe. Unlike the jaded, seen-it-all character we know today, early Rick approached science with wonder and optimism. His brilliant mind sought knowledge not as an escape from meaninglessness, but as a pathway to greater understanding. His relationship with Diane reveals dimensions of Rick's personality that have since been buried beneath layers of trauma and cynical humor. This early version of Rick was capable of deep love, commitment, and emotional vulnerability. He valued his marriage, embraced fatherhood, and balanced his scientific pursuits with family responsibilities. When we see glimpses of Rick with Diane, we witness not the emotional fortress he would later become, but a man whose brilliance was complemented by human connection. The contrast between this early Rick and his current incarnation becomes more pronounced when we examine his original motivations. Modern Rick is characterized by his belief that nothing matters, that attachment is pointless in an infinite multiverse. But early Rick didn't view scientific discovery as a means of escaping connection. Rather, it existed alongside his relationships, perhaps even enhanced by sharing his enthusiasm with someone he loved. What makes this character evolution so compelling is how it forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about Rick. The seemingly immutable traits that define him, his detachment, his substance abuse, his inability to form lasting connections, aren't inherent aspects of his personality, but acquired characteristics born from profound trauma. Understanding this transformation adds layers of complexity to his cynical worldview and self-destructive tendencies. In many ways, Rick's journey represents a frightening possibility. That genius unchecked by human connection can lead to a kind of emotional atrophy. The unimaginable mind that allows Rick to bend reality to his will is the same mind that, when wounded, constructed impenetrable walls around his capacity for vulnerability. His intellect became both his greatest strength and the means by which he distances himself from the pain of his past. Rick C. 137's early days shine a light on the person he might have been, and occasionally still glimpses in rare moments of connection with his grandchildren. We see a man whose scientific brilliance existed alongside genuine human bonds, whose extraordinary mind enhanced rather than replaced his capacity for love. This stark contrast to his current state suggests that Rick's cynicism isn't innate but acquired, a shield constructed against unbearable pain. As we witness Rick's earliest days, a crucial question emerges. What catalyst could possibly transform this ordinary scientist into something far darker? What force would be powerful enough to shatter not just a man's heart, but his entire worldview? The answer lies in a confrontation with another version of himself, one who embraced the multiverse's infinite possibilities for entirely different reasons. Early Rick reminds us that even the most damaged characters have origin stories rooted in ordinary human experiences. Before he became the multiverse's most wanted criminal, before he constructed walls between universes, before he became the nihilistic genius we know, Rick was simply a man who loved his family. This foundation makes his subsequent transformation all the more tragic, as we understand precisely what was lost when Rick lost his world. What could possibly turn a man with everything to live for into someone who believes nothing matters? The answer lies in a cosmic tragedy so profound it extends beyond a single universe. The destruction that befell Rick wasn't just a personal loss. It was an erasure so complete that it fundamentally rewrote the fabric of the multiverse itself. Rick's breakthrough with portal technology didn't just revolutionize science, it attracted the attention of his interdimensional doppelganger, Rick Prime. This alternate version shared our Rick's genius, but none of his humanity. Where C-137 saw portal technology as a tool for discovery, Rick Prime recognized its darker potential: absolute freedom from consequences. With infinite realities at his fingertips, Rick Prime could indulge his most destructive impulses without ever facing repercussions. The true horror of what happened to Rick goes far beyond what we initially understood. Season 5 revealed the devastating truth. Rick Prime didn't merely murder Diane and Beth in one universe as a random act of violence. His actions were calculated and cosmically devastating. Using the Omega device, a technology of unimaginable power, Rick Prime systematically erased Diane from existence across every universe within the multiverse. This wasn't just murder. It was the complete annihilation of the woman Rick loved from reality itself. This cosmic-scale tragedy created a wound in Rick's heart that exists across all realities simultaneously. The emotional impact was catastrophic, triggering a complete psychological breakdown that would forever alter his relationship with the multiverse. In those moments after discovering what had happened, we see the birth of the Rick we know today, a man whose grief is so overwhelming that it transforms into something harder and colder. The optimistic scientist who once saw wonder in the cosmos now saw only emptiness. The episode Mortican finally confirmed what many fans had long suspected. Rick and Rick Prime were the only two Ricks across the entire multiverse who independently invented portal technology. This creates a unique bond between them, a twisted connection rooted in their shared genius and now their intertwined tragic histories. Two sides of the same brilliant coin, one who chose family and one who chose himself, now locked in a cosmic game of cat and mouse spanning countless realities. Visual cues in the show's flashbacks tell the story of Rick's emotional state in the aftermath. We see him collapse into alcoholism, his newly adopted flask becoming both shield and weapon against his overwhelming grief. His lab, once a place of creation and discovery, becomes a workshop for instruments of destruction. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, now dull with pain and rage. These subtle visual details communicate volumes about the internal devastation Rick experienced without a single word of dialogue. Rick's obsession with revenge becomes the singular driving force in his existence, a purpose that consumes him entirely. This isn't a simple case of vengeance. It's the only thing keeping him functional. His grief manifests primarily as rage, a burning need to hunt down and destroy the being responsible for taking everything from him. We learn that this obsession drives him for decades, pushing him to track and kill countless other Ricks across the multiverse in his relentless search for the one Rick responsible. What makes this tragedy even more profound is how it fundamentally altered Rick's journey through the multiverse. Without Diane, without that emotional anchor, Rick becomes untethered from humanity itself. The emptiness left in the wake of her erasure becomes a void that Rick fills with nihilism, scientific advancement, and destruction. The man who once conducted science out of wonder now wields it as a weapon, creating increasingly dangerous technologies in his quest to find and eliminate Rick Prime. The death of Diane represents the death of Rick's humanity, as one scholar of the show put it. This isn't hyperbole. It's literally what we see unfold across seasons of careful character development. The moment when Rick's emotional connections were severed became the catalyst for everything that followed. His capacity for love didn't simply diminish. It was replaced with nihilistic vengeance, a belief that in a multiverse where his Diane could be erased, nothing could possibly matter. The tragedy reshapes Rick at his core, transforming him from an optimistic scientist into a vengeful hunter. We see this transformation play out in his physical appearance, his increasingly erratic behavior, and his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of his target. Rick begins tracking Rick Prime across countless realities, leaving destruction in his wake. This isn't just a man looking for revenge, it's a force of nature tearing through the multiverse with singular purpose. What makes this story so compelling is that Rick's transformation isn't simply about becoming evil, it's about becoming broken. His brilliance remains intact, even enhanced by his rage, but his emotional capacity becomes stunted, calcified into something barely recognizable as human. The contrast between the man he was and the being he became illustrates the price of his trauma more effectively than any monologue could. The ripple effects of Diane's erasure extend far beyond Rick himself. By systematically removing her from every universe, Rick Prime didn't just break one man, he fractured reality itself. The multiverse responds to this wound, this absence, by reshaping around it. Rick's subsequent actions, his hunt for revenge, his creation of the Citadel, his construction of the Central Finite Curve, all of these cosmic-scale events stem from this one catalytic moment of loss. In many ways, Rick's story becomes a tragic inversion of the hero's journey. Instead of returning from his adventure, transformed but whole, Rick's journey through the multiverse only compounds his trauma. Each empty universe where Diane should exist but doesn't serves as a fresh reminder of what he's lost. Each encounter with another Rick, a Rick who might have had a different fate, forces him to confront his own broken reality. The multiverse wasn't prepared for what Rick C-137 would become after his devastating loss. When grief and genius collide at cosmic scale, the result isn't just destruction. It's a complete transformation that would make even the most hardened Ricks across infinite realities tremble with fear. The man who once rejected the multiverse to stay with his family became its most feared predator, hunting through endless dimensions with a single-minded focus that would reshape the very fabric of interdimensional society. Rick's rampage began almost immediately after his loss. The quiet scientist disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous, a being driven solely by vengeance. What makes this period so fascinating is how thoroughly it remade not just Rick himself, but the entire social structure of the multiverse. The flashbacks we see in Season 3 and Season 5 paint a terrifying picture of Rick C-137 systematically tracking and eliminating Rick after Rick across countless realities. These weren't random acts of violence, but a methodical hunt for Rick Prime. Every Rick he encountered was interrogated. Every universe searched for clues. The cold precision with which he carried out these murders shows how thoroughly grief had transformed him. In one particularly chilling flashback, we see Rick casually drinking at a bar, seemingly relaxed until he spots another Rick across the room. Within moments, the entire establishment erupts in chaos as C-137 eliminates not just his target, but anyone who stands in his way. What's truly remarkable about this period is that Rick's scientific genius didn't diminish. It evolved. His weapons became more sophisticated, his defenses more impenetrable. Each encounter with another Rick taught him something new, forced him to innovate in ways that made him increasingly dangerous. While other Ricks across the multiverse had certainly created impressive technology, C-137's devices were specifically engineered for one purpose: hunting other Ricks. Portal guns modified for stealth, shields that could detect the unique brainwave patterns of approaching Ricks, weapons that could bypass the defenses other Ricks typically employed. His arsenal expanded with every successful hunt. This technological evolution wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. Each new invention represented Rick further embracing his new identity as an interdimensional avenger. The careful, methodical scientist who once worked in his garage became someone who could improvise devastating weapons from whatever materials were at hand. In one particularly telling flashback, we see Rick fashioning a deadly trap from seemingly innocuous bar supplies, demonstrating how thoroughly his genius had been weaponized by his pain. The other Ricks across the multiverse weren't blind to this threat. As word spread of C-137's rampage, individual Ricks began to realize something unprecedented. They needed each other. The formation of the Citadel of Ricks stands as perhaps the most profound testament to how terrifying C-137 had become. Think about that for a moment. Beings who prided themselves on their independence and uniqueness, who typically viewed their alternate selves with contempt, were so frightened by one particular Rick that they created an entire civilization for protection. This isn't just speculation. The show explicitly confirms that the Citadel was formed as a direct response to Rick C-137's actions. The fact that thousands of Ricks, each with an ego the size of a small sun, would willingly subject themselves to rules and governance shows just how thoroughly C-137 had terrified them. They built an entire societal structure with its own economy, military, and political system, all because one man's grief had made him too dangerous to face alone. During this period, Rick earned the title the Rickest Rick, a designation that speaks volumes about how his fellow Ricks perceived him. In a multiverse filled with countless variations of the same genius, C-137 stood apart not because he was smarter or more capable, but because he had embraced the darkness within him more completely than any other. He had weaponized his pain in a way that made him superior at the one thing all Ricks feared: killing other Ricks. It's worth noting that this period also marked a significant deterioration in Rick's personal health and habits. His alcoholism, which would later become one of his defining characteristics, took root during this vengeful crusade. We can see in flashbacks how the drinking evolved from occasional self-medication to constant dependence. The flask that would become his constant companion isn't just a character quirk. It's a relic from this dark period, a coping mechanism born from unbearable pain and moral compromise. The self-destructive tendencies didn't stop with alcohol. Rick's disregard for his own safety became legendary, with flashbacks showing him taking increasingly reckless risks in his pursuit of Rick Prime. In one particularly harrowing scene, we see Rick continuing to fight despite sustaining injuries that would have incapacitated anyone else. His determination to find his family's killer, overriding even his body's physical limitations. What makes Rick's rampage truly unique in the context of the show is how it inverts our typical understanding of Rick's relationship with the multiverse. The Rick we meet in Season 1 treats infinite realities as a playground, a way to escape consequences and responsibility. But during his vengeful period, the multiverse wasn't an escape, it was a hunting ground. Each new universe wasn't an opportunity for adventure, but a potential hiding place for his prey. The portal gun, typically shown as a tool of endless possibilities, became in these flashbacks a weapon of pursuit, a means to corner his quarry. This inversion speaks to the profound psychological impact of losing Diane. For most Ricks, the infinity of the multiverse represents freedom from attachment. Why care about any one person when infinite versions exist? But for C-137, that same infinity became a curse, an endless reminder that, despite all his genius, he could never recover what he had lost. Each universe where Diane was absent was another twist of the knife, a fresh reminder of what Rick Prime had taken from him. As Rick's reputation grew, so did the legends surrounding him. Other Ricks began to share stories about the ruthless hunter tracking them across dimensions. These weren't just stories of violence, but tales of strategic brilliance, of traps so perfectly designed that even the smartest beings in the multiverse fell into them. C-137 became something more than just another Rick. He became a boogeyman, the threat that kept other Ricks looking over their shoulders, never knowing when he might appear. The legends of Rick's vengeance echoed across dimensions, but the boogeyman of the multiverse wasn't satisfied with merely hunting his prey. He wanted to change the rules of existence itself. As his search for Rick Prime stretched into decades without success, C-137 began to consider a far more ambitious solution to ensure his dominance wouldn't be challenged again. After years of fruitless hunting, Rick reached a turning point that would forever alter the fabric of reality. Frustrated by his inability to locate Rick Prime and increasingly paranoid about potential threats to his power, Rick conceived of something unprecedented, a multiversal partition that would fundamentally reshape reality to his advantage. This wasn't just another invention or weapon, this was cosmic architecture on a scale that defied comprehension. The Season 5 finale finally revealed the truth behind what became known as the Central Finite Curve, a carefully constructed wall separating all universes where Rick is the smartest being from those where he isn't. Think about the implications of this for a moment. In a supposedly infinite multiverse with endless possibilities, Rick deliberately cordoned off only those realities where his intellectual supremacy remained unchallenged. This wasn't just a technological marvel. It was the ultimate expression of Rick's God complex. By designing this multiversal partition, he wasn't just trying to find Rick Prime anymore. He was literally reshaping the boundaries of existence to ensure nothing could ever threaten his position at the top of the cosmic hierarchy. The Central Finite Curve represents a level of control that transcends mere vengeance, reflecting Rick's evolution from a man seeking justice to a being actively playing God. What makes this even more fascinating is that despite his loathing for other versions of himself, Rick C-137 actually collaborated with them to build this reality-altering construct. For someone who had spent years methodically hunting and eliminating his alternate selves, this partnership reveals just how far Rick would go to secure his dominance. He willingly compromised his revenge quest, working alongside the very beings he despised, all for the sake of greater control over reality itself. The episode Rick Mirai Jack delivered another significant revelation. Rick Prime and Rick C-137 were the only two Ricks across all realities who independently invented portal technology. This fact underscores just how special these two particular Ricks are within the grand cosmic scheme, and perhaps explains Rick's obsession with ensuring his unique status would never be challenged by anything beyond the curve. When we examine Rick's creation of the Central Finite Curve more closely, we see a being who has moved beyond personal vendetta into something far more nihilistic. By walling himself off in a playground where he would always be the smartest, Rick essentially admitted that he might never find Rick Prime, but he could at least guarantee that no entity more powerful than himself would ever pose a threat. This is Rick fully embracing cosmic nihilism, restructuring reality itself rather than continuing to face the pain of his failures. The existence of the Central Finite Curve also explains one of the most curious aspects of the show's first 5 seasons: why we never encountered beings more powerful than Rick until the season 5 finale. The answer was hiding in plain sight. Such beings existed, but Rick had deliberately cut himself off from their realities. When Evil Morty finally broke through the curve in the season 5 finale, he wasn't just escaping Rick's control. He was opening the door to entirely new realms of possibility that Rick had been actively suppressing. Evil Morty's plan to escape the Central Finite Curve reveals just how suffocating Rick's cosmic manipulation had become. For Evil Morty, breaking through wasn't merely about getting away from Rick. It was about accessing realities where Rick wasn't the dominant force, where other beings and possibilities existed beyond Rick's carefully controlled playground. His escape suggests there are infinite realities beyond the curve that could contain entities that would challenge Rick's supremacy, raising the stakes for Rick's character in future seasons. What's particularly fascinating about the Central Finite Curve is what it tells us about Rick's psychology. After failing to capture his nemesis, instead of admitting defeat or redefining his purpose, Rick literally changed the rules of reality. It's like a child who, upon losing a game, decides to rewrite the rulebook to ensure they can never lose again. But in Rick's case, he had the intelligence and technology to actually do it, to reshape the fundamental structure of the multiverse to suit his needs. The creation of the curve represents Rick's transformation from vengeful hunter to multiversal architect. No longer content to chase his prey across infinite realities, Rick decided to become the master designer of those realities instead. This shift marks a pivotal evolution in his character, from someone driven by emotional pain to someone who now seeks to control the very fabric of existence itself. We can also view the Central Finite Curve as Rick's ultimate defense mechanism. After losing everything he loved to Rick Prime, he created a sanctuary where nothing could ever challenge him again. By isolating himself in realities where his intellect reigned supreme, Rick constructed the ultimate safe space, a cosmic comfort zone where his dominance was guaranteed by the very structure of reality itself. Yet, there's a profound irony in Rick's grand creation. By limiting himself to universes where he's always the smartest, he also limited his own growth and potential. Rick walled himself off from experiences and entities that might have challenged him in meaningful ways or offered new perspectives. In his quest for absolute control, he trapped himself in a prison of his own making, a multiverse shaped to his specifications, but ultimately a smaller, more confined existence than the true infinite potential of reality. After walling himself off from the true infinite multiverse, the supremely dangerous Rick C-137 made perhaps his strangest move yet. He settled down. But his choice to move in with the Smith family wasn't some random act of sentimentality. Behind this seemingly ordinary decision lay something far more calculated, revealing a vulnerability that even Rick himself might not fully recognize. For decades, Rick had traversed countless realities, hunting Rick Prime with a singular obsession that consumed his existence. But after years of fruitless searching, he made a strategic pivot, choosing to play the long game. What looked like Rick simply returning to reconnect with the daughter he'd abandoned was actually a meticulously planned trap. He specifically selected a reality where another Rick had already abandoned Beth, allowing him to seamlessly insert himself into their lives while waiting for his true target to potentially return. This decision reveals something profound about Rick's character. Despite his cosmic wanderings and godlike status within the Central Finite Curve, he still maintained enough emotional connection to recognize Beth as his daughter, even a version from another reality. The cold, calculating sociopath we thought we knew was playing a more complex game than anyone realized. Season 6 delivered the revelation that makes Rick's strategy crystal clear. Morty's original grandfather was Rick Prime himself. This knowledge cast every interaction from the first season in a new light. Rick wasn't just hiding from the Galactic Federation or taking advantage of his family for convenience. He was playing an elaborate game of multiversal chess, positioning himself precisely where his nemesis might eventually return. In the early episodes, we see Rick's relationship with the Smith family as purely transactional. He treats them with contempt, manipulates them for his purposes, and seems genuinely irritated by their presence. His primary use for Morty is coldly practical. The boy's brainwaves create a natural camouflage that masks Rick's genius-level thought patterns from detection. Morty's brainwaves are the perfect complement to Rick's, the show explains, making the teenager a walking shield against other Ricks who might be hunting him. The family dynamic we initially witness couldn't be more dysfunctional. Rick deliberately disrupts their lives, drags Morty away from school for dangerous adventures, and treats Jerry with outright hostility. He operates as though his presence in their home is merely a convenience, a base of operations while he waits for his real mission to unfold. When Beth asks why he suddenly returned after abandoning them for so many years, Rick provides only vague, dismissive answers. Yet something unexpected happens along the way. The calculated decision to join this family begins to affect Rick in ways he never anticipated. The Smith household slowly transforms from a strategic waiting room into something that resembles a genuine home. Despite his resistance, despite his cynicism, despite everything he's done to wall himself off emotionally, Rick begins forming attachments. This transition doesn't happen quickly or easily. Rick fights it at every turn, maintaining his caustic personality and reckless behavior as defensive mechanisms. The man who created the Central Finite Curve to ensure his supremacy can't afford to show weakness, even to himself. When moments of genuine connection occur, he typically undermines them immediately with cruel jokes or by putting someone in danger. What makes Rick's gradual emotional evolution so compelling is that it's happening to someone who's experienced decades of multiversal trauma. This is a man who watched his wife and daughter die, who hunted versions of himself across infinite realities, who walled himself off from entire universes where he might not be dominant. The damage is deep and seemingly irreparable. His defense mechanisms aren't just psychological, they're built into the very structure of reality itself through his creation of the Central Finite Curve. As seasons progress, we watch Rick's carefully constructed emotional walls begin to crack. Small moments reveal his growing attachment to this family he initially viewed as disposable. When forced to flee their original reality after catastrophically transforming everyone into Cronenberg monsters, Rick shows genuine concern for Morty's psychological well-being, something the purely exploitative Rick of early episodes wouldn't have bothered with. The exploitative relationship gradually transforms into something more complex. Rick still uses Morty as a tool, but moments of genuine protection and concern begin to emerge. He makes sacrifices he would never have considered before. The family he chose for purely strategic reasons becomes something he actually values, though he'd never admit it directly. This reluctant attachment represents the greatest irony of Rick's existence. The man who literally separated himself from realities where he wasn't the most intelligent being now, finds himself emotionally dependent on a perfectly ordinary suburban family. His quest for absolute control has led him to a situation where his happiness increasingly depends on relationships he can't fully control. The most dangerous mind in the multiverse finds himself vulnerable in ways he never anticipated. After decades spent hardening himself against everything, Rick now has people he cares about, people who could be used against him, people whose loss would cause him pain. It's the one variable his brilliant mind couldn't account for, that in waiting for his nemesis, he might accidentally find a reason to care again. Beth represents a particularly complex emotional tangle for Rick. Though not his original Beth, she serves as both a reminder of what he lost and a second chance he never expected. Their relationship evolves from awkward distance to something resembling actual father-daughter dynamics, complete with the complications of Rick's prolonged absence and Beth's abandonment issues. She craves his approval while he struggles with the guilt of replacing her real father, a complexity neither fully acknowledges. Summer and Jerry, initially peripheral concerns in Rick's strategic planning, gradually become part of his expanding emotional universe as well. Even his antagonistic relationship with Jerry evolves from pure contempt to a grudging coexistence that occasionally verges on mutual understanding. The family unit, dysfunctional as it remains, begins to heal some of the cosmic loneliness Rick has carried for decades. Beyond the tactical advantages of the Smith family, Morty emerged as the one element in Rick's carefully calculated existence that he never saw coming. The concept was simple. Morty's brainwaves perfectly complemented Rick's genius-level thought patterns, creating a natural camouflage that made them virtually undetectable when together. But what started as a purely utilitarian relationship gradually evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. When we first meet Rick and Morty in the series, their dynamic is clearly imbalanced. Rick demonstrates no qualms about putting Morty in dangerous situations, dragging him from school for adventures, and repeatedly dismissing his concerns as irrelevant. "You're a tool, Morty," Rick tells him early on, establishing their relationship as fundamentally exploitative. Morty exists primarily to serve Rick's needs, a human shield against detection and a convenient assistant for his schemes. What's fascinating about their relationship is how this initial power dynamic begins to shift. For someone who claims to have seen everything the multiverse has to offer, Rick finds himself increasingly surprised by Morty's unpredictability. The teenager's moral compass, despite constant exposure to cosmic horrors, remains stubbornly intact. This presents a variable that Rick's brilliant calculations consistently fail to account for. In Rick Potion No. 9, we witness one of the first significant moments where Rick's mask slips. After transforming the entire planet into Cronenberg monsters through a love potion gone wrong, Rick transports himself and Morty to a reality where alternate versions of themselves conveniently die, allowing them to take their places. The casualness with which Rick abandons an entire reality contrasts sharply with his concern for Morty's psychological state afterward. When Morty appears traumatized by burying his own corpse, Rick offers awkward but genuine reassurance, a surprisingly compassionate moment from someone who claims emotional detachment. As the series progresses, Morty evolves from a passive follower into an active challenger of Rick's authority. He begins questioning Rick's decisions, calling out his selfishness, and occasionally refusing to participate in his schemes altogether. This growing backbone forces Rick to actually justify his actions rather than simply expecting compliance. We see moments where Rick, against his own nature, makes compromises to keep Morty by his side, concessions he would never make for anyone else. The episodes The Ricklantis Mix-Up and Tales from the Citadel reveal something even more significant: Rick's willingness to make sacrifices for Morty. These stories showcase moments where Rick puts himself in genuine danger to protect his grandson, actions that contradict his proclaimed philosophy that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse. If everything truly were meaningless to Rick, Morty would be entirely replaceable, just another interchangeable variant among infinite possibilities. Yet Rick consistently chooses this specific Morty, suggesting an attachment that goes beyond convenience. What makes Morty truly unique in Rick's universe is his ability to challenge Rick without the scientific genius or cosmic perspective that other adversaries possess. Morty's strength lies in his humanity, the very quality Rick claims to have abandoned. When Morty forces Rick to confront the consequences of his actions, he's making Rick acknowledge the emotional reality he's spent decades trying to escape. The concept of evil Morty introduces another fascinating dimension to this relationship. This variant represents the ultimate what-if scenario. A Morty who has fully absorbed Rick's nihilistic worldview while rejecting his influence. Evil Morty serves as a dark mirror, showing what happens when a Morty adopts Rick's methodology without any of the buried humanity Rick still possesses. The existence of evil Morty forces us to question whether Rick's influence on Morty is ultimately destructive, or if there's something redemptive in their bond that prevented our Morty from following the same path. As the series develops, we begin to see signs of Rick's growing emotional dependency on Morty. His fear of being abandoned by his grandson becomes increasingly apparent in later seasons. When faced with the possibility of Morty choosing a different path or forming stronger bonds with others, Rick reacts with uncharacteristic insecurity. For someone who can literally access infinite grandsons across the multiverse, Rick's attachment to this specific Morty reveals a vulnerability he would never openly acknowledge. The scientific foundation of their relationship, complementary brainwaves, takes on symbolic significance beyond its practical application. Just as Morty's brainwave patterns complete and balance Rick's, Morty himself becomes the emotional counterweight to Rick's nihilism. Where Rick sees meaninglessness in infinity, Morty finds wonder. Where Rick defaults to cynicism, Morty maintains capacity for hope. This complementary nature extends beyond brainwaves to their fundamental approaches to existence. In several pivotal episodes, we witness Rick making choices that prioritize Morty's well-being over his own self-interest. These moments often come at crucial junctures where Rick must decide between maintaining his emotional walls and acknowledging his attachment. The pattern suggests that despite his protests, Rick has come to view Morty as more than a tool. He's become the one constant in Rick's chaotic existence. Rick's reluctance to admit this attachment stems from his understanding that caring makes him vulnerable. In a multiverse filled with enemies, attachment represents a potential weakness that could be exploited. Yet Rick's behavior repeatedly betrays his stated philosophy. His actions toward Morty demonstrate concern, protection, and occasionally even pride. Emotions that have no place in the nihilistic worldview he claims to embrace. The evolution of their relationship represents Rick's gradual, reluctant reconnection with his humanity. Through his bond with Morty, Rick occasionally glimpses the person he was before trauma hardened him into the cynical being we know. These moments of genuine connection, rare but significant, suggest that beneath Rick's calculated exterior, emotional capacity remains. Just when Rick seemed to be making emotional progress through his connection with Morty, the universe delivered its cruelest joke, the return of Rick Prime. After years of searching across countless dimensions, Rick's arch-nemesis wasn't lurking in some distant reality, but had been hiding in plain sight all along. Season 6 brought the shocking revelation that Rick Prime, the murderer of Rick C-137's family and the catalyst for his entire tragic journey, was actually Morty's original grandfather. This devastating truth came to light in the Season 6 premiere, forcing Rick to confront the source of his deepest trauma, not as a distant memory or nightmare, but as a flesh-and-blood enemy. The realization hit Rick like a neutron bomb. All this time, while he had been building reluctant connections with the Smith family, the architect of his suffering had been mere steps away in the multiverse. Rick's carefully constructed emotional walls, which had just begun to show cracks through his relationship with Morty, now threatened to collapse entirely. Not from vulnerability, but from the volcanic rage that had defined him for decades. Rick's immediate response was predictable. His obsession with revenge ignited with newfound intensity. The careful balance he'd been maintaining between nihilistic scientist and reluctant family member suddenly tilted dangerously toward the vengeful hunter he'd been for most of his adult life. We see how quickly Rick reverts to his most dangerous self, setting aside the small emotional progress he'd made with the Smiths in favor of his all-consuming vendetta. What makes Rick Prime such a perfect nemesis isn't just what he did, but what he represents. Unlike our Rick, who carries the weight of trauma and loss, Rick Prime embodies pure selfishness, unburdened by emotional connections. He's the dark reflection of what Rick C-137 might have become without the transformative grief of losing his family. A being who sees infinite realities as nothing more than playgrounds for his own amusement, with no regard for consequences or connections. The contrast between them becomes most apparent in their approaches to portal technology. Where Rick C-137 originally invented it out of scientific curiosity and wonder, Rick Prime immediately recognized its potential for consequence-free indulgence. He's the ultimate nihilist, not because tragedy forced him to adopt that worldview as a defense mechanism, but because he genuinely believes nothing matters except his own desires. This makes him not just Rick's enemy, but his philosophical opposite. As Rick's pursuit of Rick Prime intensifies, we see him torn between two competing priorities: his decades-old quest for vengeance and his growing attachment to his surrogate family. This internal conflict creates the emotional core of Rick's character development in Season 6. Should he risk everything, including his tenuous connections with the Smiths, to finally confront the being who destroyed his original family? Or has he found something worth preserving that matters more than revenge? This dilemma forces Rick to question whether his revenge is worth potentially losing his new family in the process. The journey toward Rick Prime becomes as much an internal battle as an external hunt, with Rick struggling to balance his past trauma with his present connections. It's a subtle but significant shift from earlier seasons, where Rick would have unquestioningly prioritized his vendetta over everything else. Season 7's episode UNM Mortican finally brings this arc to its climax as Rick confronts and kills Rick Prime after decades of searching. The moment itself is surprisingly understated. Not a grand, cathartic battle, but a relatively quick elimination of the target Rick has sought for so long. What makes the scene so powerful is not the confrontation itself, but Rick's reaction afterward. Instead of experiencing the satisfaction he's anticipated for decades, Rick feels nothing. How's it feel? Better? No, exactly the same. Yeah, it always does, he reflects in a moment of brutal honesty. This empty victory reveals the fundamental truth Rick has been avoiding. Revenge cannot heal his deepest wounds or bring back what he's lost. The hole in his existence created by Diane's death remains unfilled, despite finally eliminating her killer. The emotional weight of this realization is underscored by the episode's use of Fade Into You by Mazzy Star, the same song that played during another existential crisis in Rick Potion number 9 Inches when Rick and Morty abandoned their original reality. This musical callback creates a powerful connection between Rick's journey and Morty's, suggesting that both have experienced similar moments of existential dread and disillusionment. After killing Rick Prime, Rick experiences a profound existential crisis. Having achieved the goal that defined his existence for decades, he's left questioning his purpose and identity. All the rage, all the planning, all the single-minded focus, and in the end, it changed nothing fundamental about his loss or his pain. This realization is perhaps more devastating than any physical confrontation could be. The aftermath of Rick Prime's death exposes the futility of Rick's revenge-driven existence. For decades, he believed that finding and eliminating Rick Prime would provide closure or satisfaction, perhaps even a measure of peace. Instead, it only highlights how empty a life defined purely by vengeance ultimately becomes. The moment serves as a stark reminder that trauma cannot be undone through violence, no matter how justified that violence might seem. This realization represents a potential turning point in Rick's character arc. With his primary motivation suddenly fulfilled, yet providing no satisfaction, Rick is forced to reconsider what truly matters to him. The connections he's formed with the Smith family, particularly with Morty, now stand as potentially more meaningful than the revenge quest that consumed most of his life. The emptiness Rick feels after achieving his vengeance creates space for something new. Without the driving force of revenge, Rick must confront questions he's avoided for decades. Who is he without his pain? What purpose can he find beyond vengeance? Can he fully embrace the family connections he's reluctantly formed? Or is he too damaged to ever truly heal? With Rick Prime eliminated and vengeance proving hollow, the multiverse wastes no time filling that void with something far more terrifying. A Morty who rejected not just his Rick, but the entire system Rick's created. Ever wonder what happens when the sidekick decides to become the ultimate villain? Evil Morty stands apart from every threat Rick has faced because he understands Rick's psychology from the inside out. From his first appearance in Season 1 as the secret mastermind behind the evil Rick robot, Evil Morty demonstrated something unprecedented. A Morty who refused to be defined by his relationship to Rick. While most Mortys accept their role as sidekicks, shields, and emotional punching bags, Evil Morty saw the fundamental injustice of this arrangement and decided to break free entirely. What makes Evil Morty truly dangerous isn't just his intelligence, it's his complete rejection of the Rick-Morty dynamic. After experiencing the toxic mentorship that defines this relationship across countless realities, he absorbed Rick's intellectual capabilities while developing a coldly calculating worldview all his own. Unlike Rick's chaotic impulsiveness, Evil Morty plans with meticulous precision, moving chess pieces across the multiverse with a patience Rick could never muster. The Central Finite Curve stands as Rick's greatest act of cosmic manipulation, sectioning off only those universes where he reigns supreme. But Evil Morty saw through this artifice immediately. When he finally revealed his master plan in the Season 5 finale, it became clear he understood something fundamental that no other being had recognized. Rick had rigged the entire multiverse game. By orchestrating his escape from the Central Finite Curve, Evil Morty demonstrated not just brilliance, but a cosmic awareness that matched or exceeded Rick's own. What's particularly chilling about Evil Morty is how he mirrors Rick's methodologies while rejecting Rick's motivations. Rick's scientific brilliance is often wielded chaotically, driven by emotional wounds he refuses to acknowledge. Evil Morty, by contrast, operates with clinical detachment, having processed his trauma and transformed it into calculated action. His emotionless efficiency makes him, in many ways, more terrifying than Rick Prime ever was. While Rick Prime was driven by selfish hedonism, Evil Morty pursues systemic change with revolutionary zeal. Season 7 raises the stakes dramatically with Evil Morty's return, now in possession of the Omega device, a weapon with the power to erase beings from all realities simultaneously. This isn't just another gadget in the endless arsenal of sci-fi weaponry the show has featured. The Omega device represents extinction on a scale previously unimaginable, even in a show that regularly destroys entire planets for comedic effect. Where Rick Prime was content to kill Diane in every reality, Evil Morty now possesses the means to erase the concept of Rick entirely from existence. This positioning is deliberate and significant. Rick spent decades hunting Rick Prime, consumed by vengeance over the murder of his family. Yet the show reveals that Evil Morty potentially poses a greater existential threat. He doesn't just want to kill a specific Rick. He wants to eradicate the very idea of Rick from the multiverse. It's the ultimate. Rejection of Rick's influence, taking Rick's own nothing matters. Philosophy to its logical conclusion by making Rick himself matter so little that he ceases to exist at all. Evil Morty forces Rick to confront something he's avoided for years, the damage he's inflicted across the multiverse through his treatment of Mortys. Every abandoned Morty, every Morty used as a human shield, every Morty manipulated and traumatized by his Rick, they all represent potential evil Mortys in the making. Rick's cavalier attitude toward Mortis across the multiverse has created his own nemesis, a perfect reflection of his worst traits weaponized against him. This cosmic karma connects directly to the show's recurring theme that actions, even in an infinite multiverse, have consequences. What makes this existential threat so potent is Evil Morty's intimate knowledge of Rick's weaknesses. He understands that beneath Rick's nihilistic exterior lies a deeply wounded individual desperate for connection, yet terrified of vulnerability. Evil Morty knows exactly which buttons to push, which insecurities to exploit, and which psychological pressure points will cause Rick the most pain. Rick has spent years building defenses against external threats, but Evil Morty attacks from within the fortress walls, using Rick's own patterns against him. The Season 7 finale delivers on this threat when Evil Morty successfully escapes the Central Finite Curve, breaking through to realities where Rick is not the dominant force. This achievement isn't just a personal victory for Evil Morty, it's a fundamental reshaping of the show's cosmology. For 6 seasons, we've been led to believe Rick is the apex predator of the multiverse. Evil Morty's escape suggests something far more unsettling. There are realities where beings exist that make Rick look insignificant by comparison, and Evil Morty now has access to them. Evil Morty's methods throughout the series showcase how thoroughly he's absorbed Rick's worst traits while transcending them. His manipulation of the Citadel political system, his control of other Ricks through technology, and his willingness to sacrifice countless lives for his grand vision all mirror Rick's own approach to the multiverse. Yet while Rick remains trapped in cycles of self-destruction, Evil Morty has achieved something Rick never could: genuine independence from the pain that drives him. This threat represents a profound challenge to Rick's identity. Since losing Diane, Rick has defined himself through his pain and his genius, the two constants in his chaotic existence. Evil Morty threatens both, demonstrating that Rick's intelligence isn't unique and suggesting that pain can be processed rather than just endured. For a man who built his entire self-concept around being the smartest, most dangerous being in the multiverse, Evil Morty's very existence is an existential crisis. As viewers, we're forced to question our allegiance to Rick when confronted with Evil Morty's perspective. Is Evil Morty truly evil? Or is he simply the first Morty to recognize the inherent injustice of the system Rick created and take decisive action against it? The show deliberately blurs these moral lines, suggesting that in a multiverse created and manipulated by Rick, Perhaps the truly revolutionary act is to reject Rick entirely. For all Rick's genius, his vendetta against Rick Prime became more than a mission. It was his identity. What's left when you achieve the goal that defined your existence for decades? The emptiness that follows can be more terrifying than any interdimensional monster. Rick's moment of triumph after killing Rick Prime wasn't accompanied by fireworks or celebration. Instead, we witnessed something far more profound, a hollow victory, punctuated by the quiet realization that vengeance changed nothing. After dedicating his life to hunting down his family's killer, Rick delivers that fatal blow only to discover an unsettling truth. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it merely exhausts them. The aftermath leaves Rick in an unfamiliar territory. For the first time in decades, he has no clearly defined purpose driving his actions. This vacuum creates an existential crisis that even Rick's brilliant mind struggles to process. What do you do when the goal that justified every questionable decision, every moral compromise, simply vanishes? The answer isn't found in a portal gun or spacecraft schematics. It requires Rick to face something he's avoided far longer than Rick Prime, himself. The void left by Rick's completed revenge quest forces him to confront questions he's pushed aside for years. Who is he without his vendetta? Can he find meaning beyond the hunt? More importantly, does he even want to? These questions don't have easy answers, especially for someone who's spent decades armoring himself against vulnerability. In Fear No Mort, we see Rick facing this crisis directly through an unexpected mechanism, the fear hole. This psychological construct doesn't just force characters to confront what terrifies them, it reveals what they truly value. For Rick, whose emotional attachments have been carefully compartmentalized, the fear hole presents a unique challenge. It strips away his defenses, revealing what lies beneath his carefully constructed persona. The episode brilliantly contrasts Rick's past and present, showing how his reluctance to enter the fear hole connects to deeper anxieties. While we might expect Rick's greatest fear to be something cosmic or related to Rick Prime, it turns out to be much more human, the fear of losing Morty. This revelation is significant because it shows how much Rick has changed since joining the Smith family. The man who once traversed the multiverse alone, fueled by vengeance, now fears losing his connection to a teenage boy who constantly questions his authority. Rick's journey through the fear hole ultimately leads him to confront his deepest fears, particularly the fear of losing Morty. The episode illustrates that while he has achieved his goal of revenge, he must now navigate the complexities of his relationships and find new meaning in his life beyond vengeance. What makes this development so compelling is how it contrasts with Rick's professed nihilism. For someone who claims nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, Rick's fear of losing Morty represents a profound contradiction. It suggests that despite his assertions to the contrary, Rick has formed genuine attachments that matter deeply to him. His reluctance to face these feelings doesn't stem from their absence, but from the vulnerability they represent. When given the opportunity to see Diane again within the fear hole, Rick hesitates. This moment represents a crucial turning point, rather than retreating into his past. Trauma, Rick begins to acknowledge the importance of his present relationships. It's not that he's forgotten Diane or the pain of losing her. Rather, he's starting to understand that clinging to that pain has prevented him from fully engaging with his current family. This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. Rick still struggles with vulnerability, often hiding genuine emotion behind sarcasm and scientific jargon. But the completion of his revenge quest has removed his primary excuse for emotional distance. Without the hunt for Rick Prime consuming his attention, Rick must confront the connections he's formed despite his best efforts to remain detached. The emptiness Rick feels after killing Rick Prime becomes a potential space for growth, a blank canvas where he might paint a different future. This opportunity for transformation represents Rick's potential for redemption. After decades of allowing vengeance to dictate his actions, he stands at a crossroads where he might finally move beyond the constraints of his trauma. But redemption isn't guaranteed, especially for someone as damaged as Rick. His pain runs deep, etched into his psyche by decades of multiversal wandering and the systematic erasure of his wife from every reality. Moving beyond this trauma requires more than simply acknowledging it. It demands that Rick actively choose a different path forward, one that embraces connection rather than isolation. The challenge Rick faces isn't merely philosophical, it's deeply personal. Can someone who has witnessed the infinite horror and wonder of the multiverse find meaning in ordinary human connections? Can the man who created a wall around realities where he isn't supreme learn to value relationships where he isn't in control? These questions don't have easy answers, but they define Rick's journey after his empty victory. What makes Rick's situation particularly poignant is that his greatest obstacle isn't an external threat, but his own defense mechanisms. For decades, Rick has protected himself from pain by embracing nihilism, treating the multiverse as meaningless and attachment as futile. Dismantling these beliefs means confronting the vulnerability he's spent a lifetime avoiding. The Smith family offers Rick a lifeline, a chance to rebuild what he lost when Diane was taken from him. But accepting this opportunity requires Rick to acknowledge that despite the infinite nature of the multiverse, specific connections matter. It means admitting that his grandson isn't just a tool or shield, but someone whose welfare genuinely concerns him. Rick's relationship with Morty has evolved from purely exploitative to something more complex. While he may never be a conventional grandfather figure, Rick's concern for Morty reveals a capacity for care that contradicts his nihilistic worldview. This contradiction creates tension within Rick, a struggle between his ingrained cynicism and his genuine attachment to the Smith family. As Rick navigates this post-revenge landscape, he faces a fundamental question. Is he defined by his past, or can he create a new identity that incorporates both his trauma and his potential for growth? The answer remains uncertain, but the very existence of the question suggests evolution in a character who once claimed that nothing matters, with absolute conviction. After Rick Prime's body cooling in the dirt, Rick finds himself facing an unexpected enemy far more dangerous than any. He's hunted. The possibility of his own redemption. The multiverse's most brilliant mind can solve impossible equations and build reality-bending technology. But can a man who's seen infinite versions of existence ever truly find peace with just one life? This is the question that hangs over Rick's uncertain future, now that his lifelong vendetta is complete. What happens when the endless chase ends? Rick stands at a precipice between two possible paths, continuing his destructive spiral or embracing genuine human connection with the Smith family. The emptiness he experienced after killing Rick Prime wasn't just disappointment. It was the void where his identity used to be. In recent episodes, we've seen small but meaningful shifts in Rick's behavior that would have been unthinkable in earlier seasons. Take the moment in Season 7 when Rick removes a parasitic creature from Morty's neck and actually hesitates before making a cruel joke. Or when he builds Beth a replacement childhood toy with no apparent benefit to himself. These aren't grand gestures of redemption, but tiny fissures in the wall of emotional isolation he's spent decades constructing. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of Rick's potential evolution comes in Season 7's Fear No Mort, when the fear hole forces Rick to confront what truly terrifies him. The revelation isn't cosmic oblivion or even the prospect of meeting a superior intellect. It's the possibility of Morty giving up on him. This moment of brutal honesty strips away the cynical armor Rick has worn since his original family's death. The fact that Rick turns away from the opportunity to see Diane again within the fear hole speaks volumes about his gradual acceptance of present relationships over past ghosts. Yet Rick's potential for growth exists in constant tension with his darker impulses. His self-destruction isn't merely a habit. It's a deeply ingrained response to the cosmic insignificance he perceives. Each time Rick drinks himself into oblivion or casually murders beings across the multiverse, he's reinforcing neural pathways of nihilism that have been his primary coping mechanism for decades. Breaking this cycle would require Rick to confront a terrifying possibility. That genuine connection might actually matter in an infinite universe. The complexity of Rick's potential redemption becomes even more acute with evil Morty's possession of the Omega device. This isn't just another villain to defeat. It's an existential threat that represents everything Rick has feared about attachment. Evil Morty embodies the ultimate rejection, a Morty who has completely abandoned the Rick-Morty dynamic while obtaining power that rivals or exceeds Rick's own. The threat of being erased from existence itself creates a new urgency that could either accelerate Rick's growth or send him spiraling back into his darkest impulses. We've witnessed how Rick responds to existential threats in the past. When faced with the Council of Ricks or the Galactic Federation, Rick's solution was overwhelming force and manipulation. But Evil Morty presents a unique challenge. He understands Rick's psychological weaknesses because he was shaped by them. This confrontation will test whether Rick has truly evolved or if his apparent growth is merely a temporary deviation from his fundamental nature. The most telling sign of Rick's potential for change may be his increasing willingness to acknowledge his own vulnerability. In Season 6, we see Rick actually admitting to Beth that her approval matters to him, a level of emotional honesty that would have been unthinkable for the Rick we met in Season 1. Similarly, his reluctant but genuine apology to Morty after a particularly traumatic adventure suggests that Rick is beginning to recognize the impact of his actions on those around him. Rick's cosmic awareness also presents a unique challenge to his healing. How does someone who has witnessed infinite realities find meaning in a single life? The multiverse itself becomes both Rick's greatest power and his greatest psychological barrier. Each time Rick opens a portal to another reality, he's confronted with the philosophical question that has tortured him since Diane's death. If everything exists somewhere, does anything truly matter? Rick's potential redemption requires him to answer this question with something other than nihilistic despair. The Smith family itself represents Rick's most significant opportunity for healing. Despite his claims that family is a biological trap, Rick has gradually integrated himself into their lives in ways that contradict his stated philosophy. His relationship with Summer has evolved from dismissive tolerance to genuine mentorship. His complex bond with Beth reflects his struggle between paternal instinct and emotional avoidance. Even his antagonistic relationship with Jerry has softened into something resembling reluctant respect. But it's Morty who remains the linchpin of Rick's potential redemption. The grandson he initially viewed as nothing more than camouflage has become the one person capable of pulling Rick back from his darkest moments. Their relationship has evolved from purely exploitative to something far more complex, a partnership where Rick's cosmic brilliance is tempered by Morty's emotional intelligence. The question isn't whether Rick is capable of love. It's whether he can accept the vulnerability that comes with it. Perhaps the most profound indicator of Rick's evolution comes from his increasingly nuanced view of the multiverse itself. In earlier seasons, Rick treated infinite realities as an escape hatch from consequence. "We'll just move to another reality, Morty," was his solution to catastrophic failure. But more recent episodes show Rick grappling with the limitations of this approach. We see him returning to repair damaged realities rather than simply abandoning them, suggesting a growing sense of responsibility that contradicts his nihilistic philosophy. Evil Morty's return with the Omega device creates a fascinating parallel to Rick's original trauma. Just as Rick Prime once threatened everything Rick loved with erasure, now Evil Morty possesses the power to erase Rick himself from existence. This symmetry presents Rick with a choice that cuts to the core of his character. Will he respond as he did before, with vengeful rage that consumes decades of his life, or has he grown enough to find a different path? The stakes of this choice extend beyond Rick himself. If Rick retreats into his darkest impulses, he risks becoming the very thing he spent decades hunting, a being of pure selfishness unburdened by emotional connection. But if he embraces vulnerability and connection, despite knowing their fragility in an infinite multiverse, he might achieve something far more difficult than mastering cosmic technology. He might find peace with his own humanity. As we reach the end of our cosmic journey, we can see that beneath all the infinite science and multiversal mayhem lies a profoundly human story. Rick Sanchez's evolution through pain reveals what happens when genius becomes unmoored from human connection. Rick's journey illustrates the true cost of genius, highlighting themes of isolation, pain, and the loss of human connection. The emptiness he felt after killing Rick Prime wasn't just about revenge being hollow. It was about the fundamental disconnect between Rick's brilliant mind and his wounded heart. What makes Rick's story so compelling isn't just the sci-fi adventures or clever nihilism, but the subtle ways family continues to pull him back from the void. The way his eyes soften when Morty shows genuine courage, or how he occasionally drops his guard with Beth, suggests something the show has been telling us all along. Despite his nihilistic tendencies, Rick's character arc suggests that redemption is possible through the connections he forms with family and loved ones. So, as your eyes grow heavy and you drift towards sleep, consider that Rick's true tragedy isn't the family he lost. It's his struggle to fully embrace the family he's found. In a universe where everything is possible and nothing matters, Rick's greatest adventure might be learning to love again in a way that doesn't require a portal gun. Good night. Good night.